Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Learning Lounge. I am your host, Gabbie, and next to me I have.
This is Vanessa.
I'm Tyson.
Abdul Rashid Saminu.
And I'm Tambria.
And today we also have a special guest interviewee, Dr. Marquis Holley. I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. So, Dr. Holley, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what does your research entail?
Well, hello everyone. Once again, thank you for the warm introduction. So, again, Dr. Marquis Holley, research faculty here at the University of South Florida in the Institute for School Community Partnerships within the College of Education. Research involves a lot of things, in particular working with community partnership schools. That means working with families, students, parents, teachers, and community members in general, helping them to get resources that they may not have access to, whether that is educational materials, instructional materials. We work with them through food pantries. We work with them to have health screenings and all those sorts of things. So community-based work, and we try to mean what we say. And on the research side, we try to give them a voice because typically we know these areas are sometimes silenced and overlooked. So we try to give them the space and the opportunity to share their experiences.
Thank you for that. Now, for the audience who may not know, in 2022, I took a class titled Education, Diversity, and Global Society, taught by you, Dr. Holley. One thing I really enjoyed was how you challenged us to think about the social, cultural, philosophical, and ideological aspects of education and schooling through a global lens. And this was one of my favorite courses when I was an elementary education student, and it did truly change my perspective on intersectionality and the value of my unique experience. But enough about me. Let's briefly talk about why we asked you to join us today and talk about what our project is about. So, our capstone project focuses on the global goal quality education, specifically on the target 4.7, which can be summarized as so: to ensure that all learners gain the knowledge and skills to support sustainable development through education that promotes sustainability, human rights, gender equality, peace, global citizenship, cultural diversity, and then that is it. Through the Learners Lounge, we aim to use interpersonal and intercultural communication to spark creative conversations about education, placing a focus on the unique experiences that we all have through our diverse issues, to explore diverse issues. We want to also highlight local initiatives to help bridge access between quality education in the Hillsborough County area. So, our goal is to use collaborative voices to bring a unique podcast to the community that educates, raises awareness, and also invites our audience to consider their unique experiences and join our conversations about what quality education truly means. So, with all in mind, it is such an honor to have you, Dr. Holley, and we're excited to hear your insights and get your feedback and also learn about your experiences and your perspective. So, to begin, each of us have prepared a couple of questions for you, and I do want to preface by saying, although this is an interview, it is also a conversation. So, if any of my peers feel a need to chime in, ask a follow-up question, I do encourage that. So, let's begin with Tambria.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you again for taking the time out of your day to come and speak with us. I have a question, and that is, what does good and fair education look like for students in underserved or under-resourced communities?
Mm, Good question. For me, good and fair
Mm-hmm.
education in underserved communities looks the same as it would in a quote unquote affluent environment.
Okay.
And that means that typically students have access. Now, we're talking about an ideal,
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
the status quo. The status quo is that most of these students don't have access to these sorts of things, but making sure that when it's time to be prepared for testing, for reading and literacy on the mathematical side, that there is tutors available for them, that there is a space for them if they are struggling in certain subjects that we know for testing for state and federal level,
Mm-hmm.
that the resources are there for them, that the education, the environment, if the something as little as the air conditioning system, if it is not working, that there is a repairman there that same day to repair it. I'm speaking from personal experience. When I was at a K-8 school, these students from kindergarten all the way to 8th grade, some of them did not have air conditioning for weeks. And for example, it's very difficult to learn in an environment in the state of Florida in the summertime or in the month of May where it's just hot. So the little things like that can kind of affect what we mean in terms of good and fair education. So before we get to the meat and potatoes of what good and fair education, sometimes the basics aren't even met, and those can affect those situations.
Okay. Wow. Well, you kind of touched on my next question, which was what things can we do to help students succeed in these schools? So, from personal experience, have you been a part of a school where you saw them implement some sort of resource or change that actually helped students succeed?
I can speak to a recent experience that we had where, again, students within a lot of these communities aren't typically listened to or given an opportunity to be highlighted. And with the Institute, we have recently done focus groups with them, with the parents, with CRTs, which are community resource teachers, and also with parent liaisons. And we talked to them about their experiences inside of the school. You know, what is working, what is not working, you know, what suggestions do they have to help implement to kind of, as you in your previous question, provide good and fair education and provide good and fair spaces. With those focus groups, I received feedback earlier this week from the community resource teacher that the students, these are students that were in grades 3, 4, and 5, so 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. And they came back the following week saying, are we going to do those every week? Because no one really listens to us. So can we have those every week where we can really say how we're feeling and express those things?
So the students and the parents got to be a part of that?
They do. And they were separate groups. So the students had an
okay.
opportunity to speak. Parents will have an opportunity to speak, and community resource teachers as well.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that answered my second one as well, which was, can you tell me about a time you saw this working to help other students? So I will say off of that, how much do you feel that a parent being active in their child's education, how impactful is that? If you could give us a number, what would that number look like?
In terms of like a percentage of
Yeah,
success rate?
right. So a parent that is active in their child's education versus one that's maybe not so active.
I'm not sure I can give an actual spot on percentage as to what they may be, but I can give a personal account of impact.
Okay.
And I'll use my mother as an example, and my father as well, but I'll use my parents
Okay.
as an example. When I'm a product of the Hillsborough County Public School System, so when I speak to what's happening in the community, I went to school in these communities from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And when I was in elementary school, there was a policy known as busing. You may not know what that means, but if we're going all the way back to the 1950s and 60s when Brown versus Board of Education, so Supreme Court case was passed, that is what overturned the separate versus equal policy, and that also led to integration of schools. So at that time, that was, again, think about the time frame, that was the 1950s. Integration didn't fully take place until the late 1960s, early 1970s. So 20 years after the Supreme Court case took place, that happened. I went to school decades later, and there were still integration taking place. So busing is an example of that, where students from quote unquote underserved or labeled inner city communities were bused to communities of affluent. That was another way of integrating. So we're talking about in the 80s and 90s, and in some cases the early 2000s. So not too long ago. I use my parents as an example because I had parents who were advocates for not just me, but for students and classmates inside of my community. And they, because I was bused, I'll give you an example where we are now in Tampa. I grew up in Ybor City. Ybor City, I was bused to Riverview.
Oh, that's
So
far.
a school bus would have to come pick us up and take us to Riverview. So for those listening, that is about a 30-minute drive on a bus. So my parents were part of the PTA. And because, again, we're talking about typical parents or students who can't physically drive or be there. And my parents were part of an initiative to kind of help get those parents out there to the PTA meetings, to, enforce involvement and those sorts of things. So that's why I say I can't necessarily give you a percentage, but what I can speak to is personal experience of parent involvement is one of the most critical, beneficial things anyone can do. And going above and beyond that of parental involvement, we can speak to just involvement with these children, period. They don't have not just resources, but they don't have representation. So sometimes seeing someone, much like you all, inside of the schools volunteering and assisting and helping them can be what they need to know that they are seen and heard.
That's beautiful. Oh my gosh. So how do you think that how much of missing school affects students?
Missing school affects students in a major way. That's kind of another example of what chronic absenteeism is when a student is missing a certain percentage, usually it's like 10% or more of instruction time. They miss instruction, they miss interaction with the teacher. That relationship is not established. It can be rocky with the administrators who might be the principal, the guidance counselor. If they're not in that space, then that means that those individuals cannot get to know that student. So it affects it not just inside the classroom, but outside of that area as well.
Do you think that would also play a part in like their voice not being heard or represented represented?
Absolutely. If you're not present, then you're not seen or heard.
So it's something that schools or communities can do. Is an example of that busing programs to get students to have better attendance?
Busing, well, the whole notion of busing was forced integration, if you will.
Oh.
That wasn't a quote unquote positive.
Oh.
That was a forced way of integrating schools. Even again, that was in the 50s. We're talking about the 90s and whatnot. So 40 plus years later. So that's a way of trying to rectify delayed implementation of legal legislation and policy. So I'm not necessarily busing. There's community partnership schools are a wonderful way. And I'm not saying that because I work with community partnership schools, but I've seen the work and I've seen the success rates and I've seen the communities be more involved when a student is able to go to a school sometimes within walking distance and they won't have to be on a bus. If the school is within a 1 or 2 mile radius and they're in a school with a sibling or with people they know in their neighborhood, with teachers who may be in the neighborhood, administrators and all the above, it continues to help that community evolve and grow and look out for one another, if you will.
So are all schools not community partnership schools?
They are not. Within the Hillsborough County Public School District, we have about 20. That's it.
How many schools do you think we have here?
In Hillsborough County? Oh,
far more than 20?
Way more than 20. Just Hillsborough County Public School District is the 8th largest school district in the nation.
Oh.
So we have schools, think about Hillsborough County, it goes from Ruskin, which is the south area, all the way up to right before you get to Land O'Lakes or Lutz area. That's how big the county is. Oh. So we have schools that are elementary, middle, and high all throughout that district.
And only 20.
Maybe over 400? Oh my God.
It's a large amount. Yeah, it's a large amount of schools.
It's number 3 in the state.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what can we do as a community to help these students get to school so they can receive a good education?
I would say, first of all, don't get discouraged by the numbers.
Okay.
Don't get that can be overwhelming
Hmm.
to know that a county or school district is that large.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's just showing up in the small spaces. I'm a firm believer that sometimes just going to a school within your area or your neighborhood and doing some sort of volunteer work with the students, whether that's sitting there with them if they need to prepare for reading or literacy tests, sitting there practicing it with them, going through math if you're good at math, sitting there assisting them, going through the process. Sometimes just volunteering and being in that space can be enough. We have to do our own part.
Hmm.
We can't save the world, but we
Yeah.
can change the world one
Mhm.
step at a time. So sometimes just taking those little steps is all that we need to do to kind of make a difference.
Okay. I've seen my son goes to, well, maybe I shouldn't say that on camera, but he goes to an elementary school in Hillsborough, and they've recently had like a pizza day for
Mm-hmm.
the grade level that had the best attendance.
Mm-hmm.
So those little ways to like reward the students gets them to want to come to school. My son wanted that pizza, so
Mm-hmm.
he made sure he was at school on time because traffic is a little crazy. But yes,
Incentives help.
yes.
One community partnership school, they had a bike drive.
Oh
So students with
wow.
less attendance would get a bike. And it was their attendance rate spiked by I don't want to say like 20 or 25%.
Mhm.
And we're talking about in a 30-day shift. So they went from what we consider chronic absenteeism
Mhm.
to chronic in the space
Okay.
attendance.
Okay.
Hey, my name is Abdurrashid Samino. Thank you for taking your time to sit with us here. I just have a personal question to ask. I just want to ask, how was it like at college?
At college, specifically, are you saying undergrad, grad?
Yeah,
Just in
undergrad.
general?
Yeah.
In undergrad, my undergrad experience was a little different personally because I went through. I'm not sure how many people know about like the IB program. So in high school, you go through that so that you can go to college and do those sorts of things. And I chose a different path. I ended up going to a community college
Oh.
for 2 years and getting my associates, and then I transferred to a 4-year institution. My undergrad experience was nice. I can't speak to any, outlying negative connotations. I was a communications major. I changed my major 3 times.
Wow.
I can say that I changed my major 3 times. I started off as a architectural engineering major, and I decided that as much as I enjoyed math, I didn't want to do math like that all the time. So then I switched to pre-med hematology. And then I said, that's wonderful, but do I want to be in a lab studying blood all day? Changed my major, and then I thought about things that I enjoy doing, and sometimes that was where communication came into TV, radio, broadcast, and that was the rest was history for me. So through doing all those different classes and connecting that way, so my undergrad experience was wonderful.
Wow.
I do.
And what does quality education mean to you based on your teaching experience?
Oh, quality education for me is a space where students can have critical conversations about things that they are passionate about and know that when they have those conversations with one another, that they are seen and heard and respected.
Wow. Have you seen any real world example like challenging that shape your view that makes quality education true effective?
Challenges that make it effective,
Yeah.
or challenges that make it effective. I can use an example of the course that I teach. At one point, the course that I teach was a required course for anyone who was going into education. That was removed back in 2017, and it became a gen ed class after that. And with newer legislation, now it can no longer be considered genre because it has diversity and the kind of hot words in it. So I can use that as an example of a challenge, but it's also an example of how we should continue to rise to these challenges so that, in spite of the things that are placed in front of you, how will we respond? We talked about the disparities that are going on inside of these communities. How are we going to respond and assist in helping those disparities kind of enclose those gaps?
Okay. And Tyson, thank you for being here today. My first question is, what do you believe is the most critical barrier to accessing a quality education in Hillsborough County?
Good question, Tyson. Thank you for that one. The most critical barrier to accessing quality education. I often will say that the most critical barrier will be decision makers. And that I say that because decision makers are in charge of legislation, they are in charge of the things that we're talking about. A lot of these communities don't have so access to right now with free and reduced lunch being cut, with the type of curriculum that can be used inside of the school. So sometimes the biggest barrier are individuals that are looking to make decisions that are not necessarily in the benefit for the community, but maybe for another sort of benefit.
Okay. Do you have a specific example that you've encountered or have observed?
I can say that sometimes even I'll use an example of when individuals are applying for funding for certain schools and certain areas to try to provide needs. That sometimes if decision makers are in favor of other groups that may have a um, better chance, or again, it goes back to exposure, having more access to getting the end result versus other individuals who may have more of a community mindset. If they're not used to getting their voices heard, so typically, if those people bring a quote unquote proposal forward on how to make their community better, because they're not used to being heard, they'll be overlooked by someone else who has more of a spotlight. And sometimes that's not necessarily a good thing. We have to go back to basics, and that's making sure that the parents, community members, students, teachers, and all those who are actually doing the work get an opportunity to speak about the work.
Okay. How might communication efforts help address or overcome this barrier?
Communication efforts can help in a big way. With what you all are doing here with the Learning Lounge, with podcasts, getting the word out that way, having quick snippets or videos to kind of speak to those concerns inside the community. Uh, Newsletters, um, different op-eds, or just opportunities where if you see something and you want to speak to it, take the time to do it, because it's going to take more people getting more passionate about these sorts of things to understand that it's not just a certain group's problem, it's everyone's problem. And until we get in the mindset of, as Gabbie, I say in the class and I teach, who does the narrative serve? And right now we see a narrative is in favor of a certain demographic. And why is it in favor of a certain demographic? And as we continue to do that work and we dig a little deeper, we'll start to see and get answers that we need and how we can fit into that conversation. And if that conversation needs to shift in a different way. But it takes doing the work, and it's not easy work, but it is necessary work.
Yeah, I agree. I know you touched a little bit on transportation, but my second question was, in your opinion, how does transportation influence educational outcomes in the Tampa area?
Transportation, wow, that's a rough one. I see, especially with school bus shortage and parents who may not have a vehicle, or legal guardians who may not have a vehicle to get their children to school, it plays a big impact, a big impact. And sometimes solutions, I'm not sure if even with city buses, if that is a solution, or providing more community-based initiatives where Like we talked about with community schools. Um, Transportation may not be as big of an issue if schools had more of a community mindset. That sort of thing where the student doesn't have to go to school 5 to 10 miles away from where they live versus going to school within a 1 or 2 mile radius. That may be a solution, hopefully, moving forward, that once again, decision makers consider.
Yeah, you kind of just touched on my next question. I was going to ask you if you know of any current initiatives that are trying to solve the issue locally.
I know the community partnership school, the community is that's a big initiative that they are trying to do within this area and also extending it with the grade level because some community partnership schools are just elementary, some are just middle, and we have a few that are high school. There are some that are K through 8, and that can eliminate an even bigger issue because from Head Start all the way through 8th grade, the student goes to one school and they know that school, and again, that establishes community, that establishes relationship with the teachers, with the administrators. So for that whole time period, they're at one school. And then once they get to high school, there may be another challenge that they face. But if there's community partnership schools that are high schools within that area, then that can kind of solve that problem too.
Okay. My last question I have for you is how do these transportation challenges affect students differently based on like socioeconomic status?
In a major way. As we mentioned, and the other part I would say too is that in certain communities, primarily within the East Tampa area, that is where we see a lot of disparities and also a lot of school closings. Within the past 3 years, we've had about 6 schools closed, and that's elementary and middle. And those students with those schools that were close to where they are, now they are getting bused to other schools that may be more than 2 or 3 miles away from where they are. That happened with, I know, Just Elementary closed, Kimber Elementary closed, Adams Middle closed, and I'm just naming 3. But all within that radius, there were school closures because the numbers and the justification was that the number of students that are attending are low. So it's a way to shift them to another school. And as you mentioned, with transportation, that becomes an issue. It wasn't an issue before then, but because school numbers were low, then they decided to close the schools.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I actually have a follow-up question. So, in my head, that doesn't make sense because if a school enrollment is low, I'm sure the class sizes are moderate and manageable for one teacher or one teacher with a co-teacher. But if the schools are closing and now maybe a couple hundred students are now moving to a different school, I'm sure are isn't that unsustainable? Because class sizes are already too high now, so I'm sure they're just getting higher. And this is not a sustainable practice. Would you agree?
I would, and I would say as a sidebar, especially for everyone involved in the conversation, it's an unfortunate truth that education is a business, and it's the seats. If the seats are filled, then the money will be provided. If the seats are not filled, then those doors are closed, and that is typically what happens, especially within the public sector.
It's very transactional.
Correct. Yes. It is not sustainable, but again, it goes back to what I mentioned about decision makers. If decision makers are making decisions not in favor of a community or those affected, then what are they making the decisions based on?
Well, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your insight on all the topics. I'll pass it to Vanessa.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. Again, thank you for taking time out of your day to come here with us. And I'm kind of glad that Tyson's last question kind of addressed transportation disparities because my question just elaborates just a little bit more about educational disparities in the Tampa area. I did not go to elementary school or high school here. I was in New York, so my experience is a little bit different, but I guess I just want to get your point of view of what you think. What do educational disparities look like in minority communities today here in Tampa?
Thank you for that question. It comes in a lot of ways. It comes with, as we mentioned before, like a minimal access to certain food. Like for example, in a lot of the schools within these areas, they have food pantries,
Mm-hmm.
and they have food pantries because a lot of these areas are considered food deserts, and that's a historical occurrence, and it's something that continues to present day. And those pantries, there's individuals such as like Feeding Tampa Bay and other groups that provide deliveries to those communities and gives them. And that's another thing is that it's done through those community partnership schools.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way that it's meeting those needs. So if a family is not able to feed themselves for whatever reason, there is food provided, and then that's a disparity that can kind of be resolved in that way. On the education side, again, I mentioned potentially of a lack of air, sometimes air conditioning, or if it's cold, no heater
No
is
heating.
out. So
Do you think there are like educational disparities between like teacher qualifications? Because let's say, like for example, I went to a city school and Rochester, New York, and so a lot of the times we get sub-ins, and those subs don't really have the qualifications to teach something like basic geometry. They just take whatever the teacher had planned for that day and just kind of give them. But if we had questions, it was just out floating in the air because they didn't know and we didn't know. So I guess my next question kind of adds with it. Are there certain types of schools, like public versus private, or in city schools versus suburbia, where these educational disparities are more visible for like funding, food, or just having quality teachers that know their curriculum?
we definitely see those disparities, I think, more in the public sector. And that comes in a myriad of ways. As I mentioned, with health, chronic health, with basic access to just basic resources.
Mm-hmm.
We're not even talking about the big ask of the things that we can dream of 5 years down the road. We're just talking about the basics, and that's kind of where the disparities show up within those communities. We don't necessarily see that within the private sector for different reasons. So within private schools and even charter schools, sometimes they say that charter schools are sometimes better off, and that's not always true because if a charter school is within one of those areas or zip codes that's not affluent,
Mm-hmm.
then they are facing the same thing because charter schools sometimes still fall under, they follow the same policies as a school district.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like they're private, but they're not.
Yeah.
So there's another
Exactly,
aspect that goes into that as well.
Okay. Do you see that if there's like any improvement, or do things tend to get worse over the last decade?
I'm not sure if there is a better. I what I've observed that it's kind of remained stagnant. And I'm speaking
If
from
there's some
personal,
good consistency.
yeah,
Yeah.
from personal experience because I was one of those long-term subs who worked inside the schools from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, in terms of teacher qualifications, again, going back to education is business. The goal is to have someone who is a legal adult, sometimes in front of the students. They may not be qualified to teach earth science or physics, but as long as there is a warm body standing in front of the students to give the worksheet, make sure that there's a certain level of decorum being held inside of the classroom, then business as usual, we're making progress.
That sounds like a babysitter.
Yeah.
I've actually been in that position, especially working with pre-K, 2K, because I believe it's not always integrated into elementary schools formally. So when I was 17, I was working in a private kindergarten, and I was thrown around with toddlers, kindergarten. We had a first grade in there as well. So I was tossed in everywhere. And then once school ended at 2 o'clock, they translate to aftercare. And I was one of the aftercare teachers. And they would just take all the students. It was a K through 8 school next, not K through 8. first through eighth school next door. So all the seventh graders, eighth graders will come there. So I had a classroom with students as young as 2 to 12, all in one small room. And I was just a glorified babysitter.
Yes.
The parents didn't respect me, and I was only 17. It felt like I was just around a bunch of cousins, and I was trying to tattletale to the parents, and the parents weren't taking me seriously. And although I was still doing dual enrollment and I was taking, intro to education, so I was trying to apply the same techniques that I was learning there and also conversations with the parent. But because I was so young, they didn't really respect me as a teacher or as a student who's interested in education. It was just, okay, you're just here, you're just watching my kid. I pay the monthly membership to have you watch my kid, and that's it. And it's really defeating. I feel like a lot of times those smaller schools rely on whoever is interested, and I feel like for me it was just there was no reason I was 17. I was so stressed. I was stressed about children and what they thought about me, and if I was doing a good job. I was stressed about my coworkers who treated me like a child. It was always, Gabbie, make sure you're watching the kids. Gabbie, make sure you're cleaning up the classroom. But not Miss Gabbie. I feel like I would deserve that respect as well, but because I was so young, I didn't get that. So it's definitely unfortunate how, there's a lack of respect a lot of times for teachers, but it's not always, there's so much components to it. There's not enough funding, we're not paid enough. And also, it's just kind of like we're not getting funding from the higher ups, the people who are supposed to be distributing these funds to hire quality teachers, quality mentors, quality caretakers, but they're not getting that. So everyone's frustrated. I'm frustrated on the bottom level as a teacher, but I'm sure the director was equally as frustrated just trying to keep the school open. So there's so many components of it, but there's so much frustrations. But I think, when I was younger, I kind of pointed it towards the director instead of thinking about who is above the director, who is funding this entire thing. So now, as an adult and as someone who's pursuing education, I think it definitely matters that who is in charge, who is controlling the narrative, as you always tell us. So, yeah.
And the media is great. On my first day of subbing, the person who was in charge of training us, there were about 40 of us in the room. And the individuals that we are so excited, glad that you all are here. And they're like, there's 40 of you in the room, but today, inside of the district, we have 1,200 vacancies.
12.
Wow.
And that's how many vacancies that were needed inside of school on that day.
Oh
But
my
again,
gosh,
there's
just a
only
day
40
alone.
of us here.
Wow.
So
There's 1,200 vacancies inside the school district. So that gives you an example of how we can't change this instantly, but we just start with little steps to kind of do our part and just kind of leave it there.
Why is there a lack? Do you think people don't want to be teachers?
I'm not sure if people just don't want to be teachers, and again, if the space is there for them to feel valued or welcomed inside of it. I can use that example even within higher education. I'm in the College of Education, but typically when it comes to who gets the exposure, who gets the spotlight, who gets the fanfare, it's very rarely the College of Education. It typically comes from, and it's no shade or disrespect to any other group. I'm well rounded. I love all groups, but if it's medicine, if it's business, if it's another group that can get more exposure, that would be the one who gets, the microphone. When we say that, but we also know that the foundation of all of those things is education.
What are some misconceptions people have about students in minority communities that affect educational disparities?
Oh. I think a lot of the misconceptions are based on conversations that are not encouraged. If we don't have conversations, when we talk about DEI, the hot words, so diversity, equity, inclusion, when we talk about those sorts of things that are forbidden in certain spaces. Um, they're forbidden because it allows everyone, once again, to think critically.
Mm-hmm.
It allows everyone to look in the mirror and examine themselves. And it allows people to kind of step out of their comfort zones.
Mm-hmm.
And because if we can't see ourselves for who we are, then there's no need to go and tell someone else how to evaluate themselves. It kind of starts with you.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're able to kind of have a conversation, and like we're doing here with this podcast, we can't have this conversation if we're not willing to ask the hard questions.
Definitely.
And that's kind of
Absolutely.
where it starts at.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
So, avoiding stereotypes. I've done research where it shows that for young Black or African American girls, that they are not only hypersexualized, if they're wearing school uniforms, the way it fits on them may fit differently than someone else,
Mm-hmm.
and they are penalized by wearing the same clothing,
Mm-hmm.
but there's no sort of solution for that. If they say, do you have something else that they can wear? And it's no. And they say they have to go home, but they're wearing school uniforms.
They're wearing the uniform. They're going
And
with
that's
the code.
other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're sending them home, which leads to chronic absenteeism.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of starts that conversation
Yeah.
of how we got here and why are we there in the first place, that sort of thing.
Definitely. So how do these misconceptions affect how students are taught or treated in school? And you just touched up on that. Can you just elaborate just a little bit more on maybe other subjects?
It affects them in different ways. I've heard of them inside of classrooms because they're not welcomed in the spaces. Of course, that means they miss instruction. If the parent has to come and bring them a change of clothes, that means the parent's missing work
Mm-hmm.
to bring clothes to them, or if they have to go home, again, the parent is missing work, and now that child is missing instruction. If the parents have the role, the legal guardian has to rotate, it affects in different ways. Typically, when it comes, another part they'll say is students can make up work. The only way a student can make up work is if you have an excused absence. So if you don't have an excused absence, you don't get to make up that work. That goes as a 0 or low grade in your grade book.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of just like a ploy to let the chronic absenteeism continue, because instead of allowing the student to stay and learn, you're purposely letting them just go home. They have no choice but to go home because it seems like their uniforms are not with code, even though they are wearing uniform, but it's just because it doesn't fit maybe their body type compared to other students of different groups. It just kind of targets them.
Yes.
And I guess it does, just a little bit for my last question, how do these misconceptions influence school funding?
It can influence them in a variety of ways. On the flip side, because these schools are underfunded in the first place, I'm not seeing that they're going to be divulging much because there's not much to take away, because there's not much going in the first place. So in terms of funding for the schools that we're considering that are underserved, I'm not sure if that is as big of a hit as it may seem, because on the front end, they're not getting the support like we spoke about in previous questions. They're not getting the support in the first place.
Yeah, gotcha. Absolutely. Thank you for answering my questions. I'm just going to now hand the mic over to Gabbie.
Now that is my turn. I want to briefly add some context. So, during my study abroad with Dr. Lauren Bronstein, the creator of EDF 2085, it feels like a full circle moment to have you in front of me now. And we had conversations about the frustrations of navigating creating new courses that entail the new taboo about DEI and things like that. And in light of the new bills passed and new legislative decisions, I reflect on your course and the conversations that we had during the course. And I want to ask for the audience to understand what is changing now from before the legislation came into office and approved courses now have to be adjusted, what are the adjustments that are now required or expected with light of our current legislation?
A lot of times with the adjustments that have to be made for courses, and it's across the spectrum, it doesn't matter what college or discipline that it's in. It's basically any sort of word that is viewed as controversial or divisive.
Mhm.
Typically, it has to be omitted
Mhm.
or revised in some way so that the instruction
Mhm.
or the dissemination of the material is meets a standard.
Right.
So that goes through a process. There are committees that go through it and they sift through the courses and the curriculum, the books, and those sorts of things.
Mhm. So, with consideration to that, how do you plan on navigating critical topics that make up multicultural education, like critical race theory or definitions of sex and gender? How will you navigate that now during your courses?
Well, the interesting part about the course is that because it's no longer a required course,
Mhm.
it's viewed more in light of an elective.
Mhm.
And typically, I'll joke around and say that we're right next to basket weaving or photography or something along those lines.
Mhm.
And again, nothing against those courses,
Right.
but it's typically a choice.
Right.
Now, versus you were required to take it before,
Mhm.
now it's your choice if you choose to take the class.
Mhm.
And there's multiple sections of the class that are offered, and they fill each semester.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a reminder that if you, as students, are choosing to sign up to take the course,
Mhm.
then that means that it's our job as instructors and professors to offer the course.
Right.
And that's kind of where we view it.
Mhm.
Is that as long as the students are asking for it,
Yeah.
then we make sure that we provide it.
Right. The interest will be there
The interest is
regardless.
there.
So now, as an educator, what emotions do you feel about the adjustments that you are now expected to make?
Disappointment, but not surprised.
Yeah.
It's no secret. I mean, we're on a podcast, so if you don't see from the visual perspective, I'm a Black African American man. So I'm not surprised at the fear
Mhm.
and the disparities that are showing up
Mhm.
through the legislation. It's not anything new. Again, as I mentioned before, I was part of busing.
Yeah.
Busing was an example of integrating schools.
Mhm.
So the hot words, it's DEI now. It was something else back then. It'll be something else in the future. I had schools where they had banned books, and they were very similar to the ones that are banned now. And teachers offered it
Mhm.
and explained to us that it was on the banned list, but it was something that we were going to read to have a conversation.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of, as an educator,
Mhm.
it's our job to be there and stand in the gap for our students.
Right.
It's our job. That's why we're educators,
Mhm.
is to be a beacon and be an advocate as much as we can.
So, if there is one thing that I took from your course, is that multicultural education and diversity does not just include what most common individuals might think, such as race, gender, sex, or ethnicity, but it also includes class, ability, and socioeconomic status, and plenty more things. I've also come to understand that it is multifaceted, operating both at a macro level, which is in global, and a micro level at a local level. So my question is, despite it not being a requirement, have you seen that, and we kind of already touched on this, but do students still feel that this course is important and there's still interest and engagement?
Absolutely. I think in with the course no longer being required, it has made the student population more diverse.
Right.
The students that sign up, typically it was education majors who signed up.
Mhm.
Now I have students that are from pre-med,
Mhm.
from business, from College of the Arts,
Mhm.
art and sciences. So not just education, they're from all different disciplines.
Okay. It's a perfect segue. So, why do you believe that it is important to have courses such as EDF 2085?
Did I show that video in yours, the opening video? It's in every one of us. I don't remember if you were part of that.
That sounds familiar. Can you?
The first day, it's like a song with a montage.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
For those that don't know, there's usually a video that I open with in the class. There's a song that plays called "It's in Every One of Us," and in there, it's the picture. It's a montage of people with different faces from all over the world. So it shifts as the song goes on, and at the end, you see the globe or you see the world, and it's just kind of a reminder of. Then you have the conversation of what is it that's in every one of us, and to give the students an opportunity to have that space. These courses are important because they represent each and every one of us. It doesn't matter where we're from, um, what it is we believe, what it is that we are going through in that appointed time. We all deserve those spaces where we can have those conversations with one another and learn from one another. Conversing is learning. So it's not about agreeing, it's about having conversation. So when we have those conversations, that forces us to think critically. It forces us to reflect on the things that we've heard, fuse those things into what we are, remove those things from what we may not need. But if we don't give one another the choice and that space to do that, then we miss out on some wonderful opportunities.
Right.
So I think that's why not just that course, but any course that provides a space for a student to think critically. I think that's very necessary.
Right. Because I think we all have curiosity, and our curiosity should not be silenced, and we should be able to indulge in that with open minds and open conversations. And that's kind of what this whole podcast is about. We all are going to be learning from each other through our unique experiences. All of us came from different places and had different experiences, and indulging in our own unique perspectives and indulging in genuine curiosity, I think, is the key to learning and potential. Where is it? So my last question is, and kind of touched on it, but formally, should this be something that only education students should learn about and apply into education, or can it be applied across other fields as well?
Oh, it can definitely be applied across different fields. That's actually how I try to offer the course. Is that typically when I give them an assignment, it's think about how this can be used in your respective spaces. So regardless of whatever your major is, think about how it can affect your major and your classmate and your peers and those that you are interacting with. So if it's a business proposal, how is what we're doing in this class, how can you create a business proposal that is inclusive? If you're in medicine, how can you create a medical lab or write up that is inclusive of all those who it may be affecting? It's always just making sure that we take the extra steps to be mindful of who all these things affect.
Right.
That's really all it boils down to. But no, anyone and everyone, because everyone, regardless of how they think, everyone is DEI. The clothes we wear is DEI. The food we eat is DEI. The music we listen to is DEI.
For sure.
The classes that we take are DEI. Our interactions with whoever it is we're interacting with is DEI. Somehow, some way, it's DEI in a nutshell.
Right. So, that was all of our questions, and really grateful to have you here. And just as a group, and also considering our mission with this podcast, is there any local topic or issue that you think deserves more attention when it comes to education, quality education in the Hillsborough County area, and on a micro level, Tampa area?
Yeah, I would say going back to the whole community partnership school model, these community schools, they need faces, and they need individuals who can give a little time here and there to kind of help out and who are willing to step in and step up. So I think, again, we can't necessarily change it all in one day, but we can start at a small scale. So
This is a two-part question because I want to make sure I'm understanding what the community partnership program consists of. So is that one organization in itself, or does it total all of other organizations like Boys and Girls, YMCA? Is that all a part of the community partnership program?
It can vary. So with community partnership schools, typically you have 4 quadrants. That's how the partnership. So you have school, and then they partner with the school district, so Hillsborough County Public Schools. Then they partner with a nonprofit. That could be YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, United Way, etc. They also partner with the university. So in this case, that's USF.
Right.
And then they partner with a health partner. So because again, they don't have access to certain things. So that could be Advent Health, Tampa General, those different individuals. So that's what makes it a community partnership, because those partners are ensuring that this school gets the resources that they need.
Okay, that makes sense.
And they meet they try to meet those needs.
So is there any organization that you believe we and our audience should keep an eye on? If you can name one organization, nonprofit.
What nonprofit? There's so many. I would say any of the ones that I just named. There's big names out there.
Yeah.
Community Tampa Bay is another good group because they do a lot of this work. They're not necessarily within community partnership schools, but they do a lot of the work that we're talking about in terms of engaging and having critical conversation. It's one of the main reasons that I'm Dr. Holley today. I started back in high school with them, and they continue to do that work today.
You said
That's community of
you're writing
Tampa?
it?
Community Tampa Bay.
Community Tampa Bay.
Mhm.
Nice. Right. Well, we thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, everyone, with the conclusion of our interview, this will also be concluding our wonderful and fruitful podcast session. Our next podcast in the Learner's Lounge, you can look forward to an overview and review of everything that we've learned and done so far. And also, we'll be reflecting on some articles and research that we've all done personally, and giving some special shout outs to some organizations in the Hillsborough County area that we think you guys should all keep an eye on and continue to support and volunteer for if you have the time. Even if it's an hour or a couple hours, that does make a difference and you're contributing to something monumental. And yeah, so that's it. See you next episode.
Adios.